poor boy offers his only coat to a freezing billionaire, who collapses when he sees the name inside. William Stone gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. Outside the heavily insulated windows of his custom-built SUV, the world had dissolved into a maelstrom of blinding white. Snowflakes, driven by a furious wind, hammered against the glass, rendering visibility near zero. He shouldn't have come. Not today. Not ever, maybe. But the 15th anniversary of Tommy's disappearance loomed, a black hole in the calendar that inevitably drew him back to this godforsaken mountain range in the Colorado Rockies. He'd told his executive team he was inspecting a potential site for a new geothermal project. Plausible, given Stone Energy's relentless expansion. But the truth was simpler, sadder. He was making a pilgrimage to the place where his life had irrevocably fractured, where his bright, adventurous 12-year-old son, Tommy, had vanished during a freak spring avalanche on a father-son camping trip. One moment, Tommy was laughing, tossing a snowball. The next, a deafening roar, a terrifying wall of white, and then silence. Days of frantic searching had yielded nothing but heartbreak and a vast, empty silence that had echoed in William's soul ever since. Now that silence was filled with the howl of the blizzard. He'd ignored the worsening forecast, driven by a grief that defied logic. The powerful SUV, usually impervious to mere weather, suddenly sputtered, coughed, and died. The engine cut out, plunging the cabin into an eerie quiet, broken only by the wind's relentless assault. William tried the ignition again and again. Nothing. The temperature gauge plummeted. The digital display showed the outside temperature dropping rapidly below 0 Fahrenheit. He was miles from a nearest town, on a rarely used logging road. His satellite phone, usually reliable, showed no signal. He was stranded. William Stone, the man who commanded boardrooms, whose net worth ran into the billions, was utterly powerless against the raw fury of nature. He leaned his head against the steering wheel, a wave of despair washing over him. The irony wasn't lost on him. 15 years ago, this mountain had stolen his son. Now, it seemed poised to claim him too. He pulled up the collar of his expensive, inadequate coat. He'd dressed for a drive, not a survival situation. Hubris. Grief-stricken hubris. Time blurred. The cold seeped into the cabin, relentless, insidious. Shivers racked his body. His breathing grew shallow. Thoughts became sluggish, disconnected. He thought of Tommy's smile, the gap between his front teeth, his infectious laugh. He thought of the arguments with Tommy's mother before their divorce, the missed moments, the regrets piling up like the snowdrifts outside. He was so cold, so tired. Maybe it was better this way. An end to the aching emptiness. His eyelids felt heavy. A sudden, sharp rapping on the driver's side window jolted him. He blinked, struggling to focus. Through the swirling snow, he saw a face peering in. A small face, framed by a tangle of matted brown hair, peeking out from under a worn, oversized beanie. It was a boy, looking no older than Tommy had been, maybe younger. His cheeks were chapped red by the cold, his eyes wide with concern. With numb fingers, William managed to lower the window a crack. The wind howled, driving icy particles into the car. "What?" William rasped, his voice hoarse. "Mister, are you okay?" the boy shouted over the wind. He was dressed in clothes that looked like rags, patched jeans, layers of thin, mismatched shirts under a surprisingly thick, if battered-looking coat. "You can't stay here." "No, signal," William managed, his teeth chattering violently. "Can't move." The boy's expression grew even more worried. He looked William up and down, taking in the inadequate coat, the visible shivering. Without a moment's hesitation, The boy began shrugging off his own coat. It was an old thing, faded olive green, maybe wool or canvas, clearly too big for him, with patched elbows and frayed cuffs. "Here," the boy said, thrusting the coat through the window opening. "Take this. It's warm. You need it more than me. I live near here. I know the paths." William stared, dumbfounded. This child, dressed in rags, was offering him his only protection against the deadly cold. "No, kid, I can't. You'll freeze." "I'll be okay. I'm fast," the boy insisted, pushing the coat insistently towards William. "Please, mister. I don't want you to freeze to death." The simple sincerity, the selfless generosity from someone who clearly had nothing, cut through William's cold-induced fog. It was the first spark of genuine human warmth he'd felt in what seemed like an eternity. Moved beyond words, his survival instinct overriding his protest, he numbly reached out and took the coat. It felt heavy, substantial, and surprisingly warm, carrying the faint scent of wood smoke and pine needles. He struggled to pull it on over his own thin jacket, his frozen fingers fumbling with the zipper. As he did, his gaze fell upon the inside collar. It wasn't a printed label. Instead, sewn directly onto the worn lining with slightly uneven, but clearly legible, stitches were two words. "Tommy Stone." William's breath hitched. The world stopped spinning. The howling wind seemed to fade away. He stared at the name, his heart constricting in his chest. Tommy Stone, his son's name. Hand-embroidered, just like the labels his late grandmother used to sew into Tommy's clothes for summer camp. It couldn't be. It was impossible. A hallucination brought on by hypothermia and grief. He looked up sharply at the boy, who was watching him with anxious eyes, shivering now in just his thin layers. "This coat," William croaked, his voice trembling uncontrollably. "Where did you get this coat?" The boy looked surprised by the question. "My dad found it," he said simply. "Years ago, up on a mountain after a big snowslide. Said it was buried in the debris, but still good. Kept it for me 'cause it's the warmest thing we got. A snowslide. Years ago. Found on a mountain. Tommy Stone." The impossible weight of it crashed down on William. The shock, the wild, terrifying surge of hope, the crushing memories, it was too much. His legs gave way. He didn't collapse into the snow outside, as the prompt suggested, but the world went black for a moment, and he slumped heavily against the car door, gasping for breath, the worn coat clutched in his hands like a holy relic. The boy cried out in alarm, reaching towards him through the window. William Stone, the billionaire titan, was utterly undone, shattered and remade in an instant by two words sewn into the collar of a poor boy's coat. William's senses returned with a jolt, the biting cold a harsh slap back to reality. The boy, he needed the boy's name, was still outside, looking terrified, shouting something incoherent against the wind. Okay," William gasped, pushing himself upright, his mind racing faster than it had in years. He fumbled with the door handle, shoving it open against the accumulating snowdrift. "Get in. Quick." The boy hesitated for only a second before scrambling into the passenger seat, bringing a flurry of snow and the scent of cold, damp wool with him. He huddled there, shivering violently now, without his coat, rubbing his arms. "My name's Ben," he offered tentatively, his teeth chattering. "Ben," William repeated, the name feeling foreign, insignificant compared to the one stitched inside the coat, lying heavy in his lap. He looked at the boy closely. The right age, maybe 15 or 16. Hard to tell with the malnourishment that seemed evident in his thin frame. Brown hair, brown eyes. Tommy's hair had been a lighter brown, his eyes blue. But features could change, hair could darken. And trauma could change everything. "Stop it," He told himself fiercely, "Don't jump to conclusions. Don't let hope destroy you again." But the coat, that name? "Ben," William said, trying to keep his voice steady despite the tremor running through him. "Now, is there anywhere nearby? Anywhere at all?" Ben nodded, pointing vaguely through the snow-streaked windshield. "There's an old line cabin about half a mile up the slope. Jed, my dad, used it sometimes when he was checking traps." "Jed? Is he there?" William asked, already calculating. Ben shook his head, a flicker of sadness crossing his face. "Nah, Lung Fever. Passed away." The boy was alone. William felt a pang of sympathy, quickly followed by a surge of possessiveness. This boy, Ben, who might be Tommy, he was alone, vulnerable. "Okay, Ben," William said, making a decision. "We need to get there. Can you lead the way?" He shrugged off the precious coat and handed it back to the boy. "Put this back on." "Now." Ben looked surprised, but did as he was told, relief washing over his face as the warmth enveloped him again. William, meanwhile, rummaged in the back seat, finding an emergency kit he'd forgotten was even there. Inside, thankfully, was a foil emergency blanket, a powerful flashlight, and some energy bars. Not much, but better than nothing. He wrapped the blanket around himself, the crinkling sound loud in the confined space. "Let's go. Stay close." Pushing open the doors again, they stepped out into the blizzard's fury. The wind tore at them, visibility was still almost non-existent, and the snow was already knee-deep, making progress exhausting. Ben, however, seemed to navigate by instinct, turning off the barely visible road onto a steeper, wooded slope. He moved with a surprising agility born of familiarity with the harsh terrain. William, clumsy in his city shoes and weakened by the cold, struggled to keep up, relying heavily on the flashlight beam cutting feebly through the swirling snow. The half-mile felt like 10. Just as William felt his strength giving out completely, Ben pointed. Through the white curtain, William could just make out a dark shape, a small, dilapidated log cabin, half buried in snow. Smoke curled weakly from a crooked stone chimney. "Smoke? Someone's there?" William asked, his voice tight with alarm. Ben shook his head. "Nah, chimney just draws sometimes when the wind's right. Jed always kept some drywood inside, just in case. Maybe we can get a fire going." The door creaked open under Ben's push, revealing a single, small room. It was primitive, a rough table, a couple of stools, a stone fireplace black with soot, and a pile of firewood stacked against one wall, miraculously dry. The air was frigid, but at least they were out of the wind. While Ben expertly cleared the hearth and began arranging kindling, William sank onto a stool, utterly spent, the foil blanket crinkling around him. He watched the boy work, his movements economical and sure. This child of the mountains was far more capable in this environment than the billionaire tycoon. Ben managed to coax a small flame to life using a flint and steel William found in the emergency kit. Jed's preferred method, Ben explained, matches got damp. The fire caught, crackling cheerfully, casting flickering shadows on the rough-hewn walls. Slowly, blessedly, warmth began to creep back into the small space. They huddled near the hearth, thawing out, sharing one of William's energy bars. The silence stretched, filled only by the crackle of the fire and the muffled roar of the storm outside. William's mind was a whirlwind. He had no more, but he had to be careful. "Ben," he began gently, "about the coat. Your dad, Jed, did he ever talk about finding it? Or about finding anything else?" Ben frowned, thinking. "He didn't talk much about the before time," he said. "That's what he called it, for he found me. Just said there was a big slide, lots of mess. Found the coat buried deep near some rocks, like it was protected. So it was real good quality." He looked down at the coat he wore. So the name inside must have been the person who lost it. Tommy Stone. Did he mention finding anyone? William asked, his voice barely a whisper. Ben shook his head slowly. Don't think so. He found me a bit later, lower down the mountain. Said I was real banged up, cold, barely breathing. Didn't know who I was or where I came from. Had a bad knock on the head. Ben touched a spot near his temple, where William could now see a faint, old scar disappearing into his hairline. Jed fixed me up best he could. Said I didn't remember nothing from before. So he called me Ben. Just Ben. Amnesia. Found injured after the avalanche, lower down the mountain. It fit. It horrifyingly, miraculously fit. William felt a dizzying vertigo, hope surging so fiercely it felt like pain. How long ago did he find you, Ben? About 15 years, he reckoned. Said I was maybe about your son's age, judging by the name in the coat, when he found me. Ben looked at William curiously. You lost your son up here, didn't you? Tommy Stone. William could only nod, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. Ben's expression softened with sympathy. I'm real sorry, mister. Jed used to say the mountain takes things, but sometimes it gives them back unexpected. Could it be true? Could this boy, Ben, this kind, resourceful child of the wilderness, raised by a reclusive scavenger, really be his Tommy? The son he'd mourned for 15 years? The possibility was almost too much to bear, a fragile seedling of hope pushing up through the frozen ground of his grief. He had to know for sure. But for now, they were trapped, two souls sharing a fragile warmth in a derelict cabin, surrounded by the storm, waiting for the dawn and whatever truth it might bring. The blizzard raged through the night, rattling the small cabin, but inside, the fire held, casting a warm, protective glow. William and Ben huddled near the hearth, drifting in and out of an exhausted sleep. William's mind remained stubbornly active, replaying Ben's words, scrutinizing the boy's profile in the firelight, searching for definitive proof that wasn't there. Hope and fear wrestled within him, leaving him raw. Towards dawn, the wind began to ease. The relentless drumming of snow against the single, small window softened. Peeking out, William saw the first hints of gray light, revealing a world transformed, draped in thick, pristine white, the fury replaced by an almost unnerving stillness. The storm had broken. We need to get back to the car, William said, his voice raspy. Or maybe he remembered his satellite phone, useless yesterday, but perhaps now. He pulled it out. 1 bar, then 2. Enough. He quickly dialed the direct number from Marcus Harrison, his longtime head of security and former military man, the most trusted person in his inner circle. Harrison, the clipped voice, answered instantly. Marcus, it's William. Relief flooded him at the sound of Harrison's calm competence. I am stranded. Mountain Road 7, about 10 miles past the old Miller Junction. Cart died in the blizzard last night. Mr. Stone, we've been trying to reach you. Are you all right, sir? Alive. Frost-nipped, but alive. I found shelter in an old line cabin nearby. There's someone with me. A boy. Ben. He helped me. Weather is clearing. We already have a chopper on standby at Grand Junction. ETA 90 minutes, depending on landing conditions. Can you make it back to the road? We'll manage, Williams said, glancing at Ben, who was watching him with wide, curious eyes. Just get here, Marcus. Consider it done, sir. After the call, William explained to Ben that help was coming. A helicopter, he clarified, seeing the boy's blank look. It will fly us out of here. Ben's eyes widened further. Fly. The journey back down the slope to the road was easier in the daylight, though the deep snow still made for slow going. William's expensive SUV was almost completely buried, only a portion of its roof visible. They stamped out a clear area nearby, large enough for a helicopter to potentially land, or at least lower a winch. Then they waited. Ben seemed fascinated by the satellite phone, cautiously asking questions about it. William answered distractedly, his mind preoccupied. He needed a plan. How to explain Ben. How to proceed with the DNA test without revealing his explosive, still unproven suspicion. The distant thumping sound grew steadily louder, and soon, the sleek, dark shape of a Stone Energy helicopter appeared, circling once before skillfully maneuvering into position overhead. Snow kicked up violently as it hovered. A figure rappelled down. Harrison, unflappable even in the midst of a mountain rescue. Harrison quickly assessed the situation, his gaze lingering for a moment on Ben and his worn coat before turning back to William with a questioning look. "Mr. Stone, good to see you in one piece." "This is Ben," William said quickly, keeping his voice level. "He found me, gave me his coat, led me to shelter. Saved my life, Marcus." Harrison nodded at Ben respectfully. "We owe you a debt, young man." He secured harnesses on both William and Ben. "All right, let's get you out of here." The ascent was noisy, dizzying. Ben stared out the window, his face pressed against the plexiglass, utterly captivated by the shrinking landscape below, the world laid out like a map. William watched him, his heart aching with a confusing mix of emotions. If this was Tommy, what must he be thinking, seeing this technology, this speed after a life lived off-grid? They landed at a regional airport where a private jet waited, the ultimate symbol of William Stone's other life. Ben's bewilderment grew. He followed William wordlessly onto the jet, sinking into the plush leather seat, running his hand over the polished wood trim as if unsure it was real. During the flight back to Denver, William contacted his personal physician. "Dr. Evans, I need you to meet me at the house. I've had some exposure, need a checkup, and I have a young man with me, Ben. He's been living rough, needs a thorough examination. Malnutrition is likely." Also, William paused, choosing his words carefully. "He's an orphan, no known relatives. While you're doing the workup, I want a full genetic panel done. Check for any hereditary conditions, and run a comparison analysis against my profile. Just standard procedure for potential guardianship cases, checking for any distant familial links. Keep it confidential." Dr. Evans, accustomed to William's requests and his desire for privacy, simply said, "Of course, William. I'll be there." Arriving at William's sprawling Denver mansion was another shock for Ben. The gates, the long driveway, the sheer scale of the house. It was beyond anything he could have conceived. Staff materialized silently, taking bags, offering refreshments. Ben stayed close to William, looking overwhelmed. William led him inside, the warmth and quiet luxury a stark contrast to the mountain cabin. "You can get cleaned up here," William said, showing him to a lavish guest suite. "There are clothes, they might be too big, but they're clean. Food will be brought up. Dr. Evans will be here soon to check you over." Ben just nodded, looking lost. William hesitated at the door. "Ben, thank you for what you did back there." Ben met his gaze, a flicker of connection in his eyes. "You'd have done the same, I reckon." Maybe, William thought. He hoped so. He retreated to his study, the familiar scent of leather and old books doing little to soothe his frayed nerves. He poured himself a stiff drink, his hands shaking. He had been here, safe. The wheels were in motion for the DNA test. Now came the hardest part, waiting. Waiting to find out if the impossible hope sparked by a name embroidered in a worn old coat was the prelude to a miracle or just another cruel twist of grief. He stared out at the manicured grounds, seeing only a snow-covered mountainside and a laughing boy who had vanished 15 years ago. The following days unfolded in a state of suspended animation for William. Dr. Evans gave both him and Ben a clean bill of health, aside from predictable mild hypothermia for William and signs of chronic nutritional deficiencies for Ben. Blood samples were drawn, sent off to a specialized lab with urgent, confidential instructions. The estimated turnaround time was 72 hours, 3 days that stretched before William like an eternity. He tried to create a semblance of normalcy for Ben, who was navigating this alien environment with quiet bewilderment. William bought him new clothes that fit, simple but comfortable. They ate meals together in the vast dining room, the silence often broken only by the clinking of silverware. Ben ate hungrily but politely, his mountain-bred manners surprisingly intact. William found himself watching Ben constantly, searching for glimpses of Tommy. He noticed the way Ben tilted his head when concentrating, a mannerism eerily similar to his lost son's. Ben showed a surprising quickness with numbers when William tried to explain the basics of the stock market ticker scrolling across a screen in the study. Tommy had always loved math puzzles. But then Ben would say something about tracking rabbits or identifying edible plants, and the gulf between the privileged boy William had raised and the resourceful young man before him would wide again. Ben, in turn, seemed cautiously curious about William. He asked simple questions about the house, about William's work, about the helicopter. He seemed most comfortable outdoors, exploring the mansion's extensive grounds, his movements more fluid and confident than they were inside the imposing house. He never asked about the DNA test. William had framed it purely as a health measure. William tasked Harrison with discreetly learning more about Jed Harper, the man who had raised Ben. Harrison's inquiries in the small communities bordering the national forest painted a consistent picture. Jed was a known recluse, a Vietnam vet who had retreated to the mountains decades ago, living off the land, occasionally trading furs or salvaged goods. He was considered eccentric but harmless. Records confirmed he had no registered children. Crucially, Harrison found an old Forest Service report mentioning Jed had alerted rangers to signs of the avalanche 15 years ago and had later, unofficially, mentioned finding an injured boy with no memory, whom he was caring for. It seemed Jed had kept his promise, raising Ben in isolation but keeping him safe. Confirmation of Jed's death 6 months prior from pneumonia also came through. Ben truly was alone now, except, potentially, for William. The waiting gnawed at William. He oscillated between soaring hope and crushing despair. What if it wasn't Tommy? Could he bear the disappointment? And if it was Tommy, how would they even begin to bridge 15 lost years, especially with a wall of amnesia between them? On the third morning, Harrison arrived at the mansion, a sealed envelope in his hand. He found William pacing in the study. Harrison's expression was unreadable, but his eyes held a deep sympathy. He simply handed the envelope to William and waited near the door. William's hands trembled as he tore it open. His eyes scanned the technical jargon, searching for the conclusion, and then he saw it. The comparison analysis between William Stone and the patient identified as Ben H. Probability of paternity, 99.999%. William staggered back, clutching the report, sinking into his leather chair. Tears welled, hot and irrepressible, spilling down his cheeks. It was true. It wasn't a hallucination, wasn't a cruel trick of fate. Ben was Tommy. His son was alive, found, safe. The wave of relief was so profound, so overwhelming, it felt like his heart might burst. He choked back a sob, covering his face with his hands, 15 years of tightly controlled grief finally shattering, replaced by a joy so intense It was almost painful. Harrison quietly stepped forward, placing a supportive hand on William's shoulder. "I'm glad, sir," he said softly. "Truly glad." It took William several minutes to regain composure. He wiped his eyes, took several deep breaths. Joy warred with the daunting reality of what came next. He had to tell Ben. He found Ben in the conservatory, sketching the exotic plants with a charcoal pencil William's housekeeper had found for him. He showed a natural talent, his lines confident and observant. Tommy had loved to draw. "Ben," William said gently, sitting down opposite him. Ben looked up, sensing the gravity in William's voice. William laid the worn green coat, which he'd kept close, on the table between them. He touched the embroidered name. "Ben, we need to talk about this coat, and about your past." He explained slowly and carefully about the avalanche 15 years ago, about his son, Tommy, who was lost that day. He told Ben about the impossible shock of seeing the name in the coat Ben had so generously offered him. "Ben," William said, his voice thick with emotion, "after Dr. Evans checked you over, I asked for some tests. Genetic tests. Because there was a chance, a wild, impossible chance." He slid the DNA report across the table. He didn't expect Ben to understand the scientific details, but he pointed to the conclusion. "This report confirms it, Ben. You are my son. You are Tommy Stone." Ben stared at the report, then at William, his face paling. He looked utterly bewildered, confused, almost frightened. He shook his head slowly. "No, I'm Ben. Jed found me. I don't remember being Tommy." "I know," William said softly, his heart aching for the boy's confusion. "The doctor thinks the injury you suffered in the avalanche caused severe amnesia. You lost all memory of your life before Jed found you. Jed gave you a new name, a new life. He saved you, Ben. He was your father in all the ways that mattered for 15 years. He reached across the table, covering Ben's hand with his own. "But you were born Tommy Stone. I am your biological father. The life you lived before the accident, that was with me." Ben pulled his hand back, looking down at his own sketch, then back at William, his eyes wide with turmoil. "So, who am I?" he whispered, the question hanging heavy in the air. William felt fresh tears sting his eyes. He knelt beside Ben's chair, just as he had knelt in the snow, overwhelmed 3 days prior. "You are both," he said, his voice choked. "You are Ben, the strong, kind young man who survived against all odds, who saved my life. And you are Tommy, my beloved son, returned to me like a miracle." He didn't force an embrace, sensing the boy needed space. He simply knelt there, meeting his son's confused gaze, offering silent reassurance. "We'll figure this out together," he promised, tears mixing with an unshakable joy. "I promise. We have time now, all the time in the world." The journey ahead was uncertain, the path to reclaiming a lost past shrouded in mist. But William Stone knew, with absolute certainty, that he would dedicate the rest of his life to walking it alongside the son the mountain had miraculously returned. The revelation hung in the air, heavy and transformative. Ben, or Tommy, the name still felt foreign and unreal to him, retreated into himself for a few days, quiet and withdrawn. He spent hours walking the grounds or sketching, processing the seismic shift in his reality. William, guided by Dr. Evans and a child psychologist specializing in trauma and memory loss, gave him space, making himself available but not pushing. There are no sudden flashes of memory, no dramatic Hollywood moments of recognition. The psychologist explained that severe amnesia, especially from physical trauma sustained at a young age, might never fully resolve. The goal wasn't necessarily to recover the lost Tommy, but to help Ben integrate his known past with his newly discovered one. and to forge a healthy identity moving forward. Slowly, cautiously, Ben began to engage again. He started asking questions, tentative inquiries about Tommy, about his mother. William explained gently about the divorce, and that she lived overseas now, promising to connect them when the time felt right. About the life he couldn't remember. William answered honestly, sharing photographs and anecdotes, careful not to overwhelm him or create pressure to remember. He spoke often and respectfully of Jed, acknowledging the crucial role the man played in saving and raising Ben, ensuring the boy understood his gratitude. They decided, together, that he would go by Tommy, but that Ben was still a valid part of his identity, the name representing his strength and survival. It was awkward at first, William sometimes slipping and calling him Ben, Tommy sometimes not responding immediately to his birth name. Adjusting to his new life was a challenge for Tommy. He started working with tutors to catch up on the formal education he'd missed. He was intelligent and learned quickly, especially excelling in math and science, but the structure of schooling was entirely foreign. He struggled with social cues, having spent most of his life in near isolation. William enrolled him in extracurricular activities, hiking clubs, art classes, hoping to help him connect with peers and pursue the interests that seemed to come naturally. William, too, had to adjust. He scaled back his relentless work schedule, delegating more to his trusted executives. He learned to be a father again, not to the 12-year-old he remembered, but to the resilient, quiet young man his son had become. It required immense patience, letting Tommy set the pace, celebrating small victories. A shared laugh over a meal, Tommy tentatively asking about a stone energy project, a comfortable silence while hiking together in the foothills near Denver. William arranged for a simple, private memorial marker to be placed for Jed Harper on the mountainside, near where the old cabin stood. He and Tommy made the journey together, a quiet pilgrimage not of grief this time, but of gratitude. Standing there, amidst the silent peaks that had been the setting for both tragedy and miracle, felt like closing a chapter. The worn, green coat found its place of honor. William had it professionally cleaned and preserved, then mounted in a simple, museum-quality display case in his study. It wasn't ostentatious, but it was central, a tangible reminder of loss, survival, selfless kindness, and the astonishing reunion that began in a blinding snowstorm. Seeing the coat every day reminded William of the precariousness of life and the immense debt he owed, not just to Ben/Tommy for his selfless act, but to Jed for his quiet care, and perhaps to fate itself. He felt a growing need to give back, to channel his immense resources in a way that acknowledged the fragility he now understood so acutely. He established the Tommy Stone Foundation. Its dual mission was clear: funding advanced search and rescue operations in remote wilderness areas, equipping teams with the best technology possible, and providing educational grants and support for underprivileged youth in rural and mountain communities. Children like Ben, who might otherwise lack opportunities. It was a way to honor both the son he lost and found, and the life Ben had lived. Months turned into a year, then two. Tommy settled into his new life, slowly bridging the gap between Ben the survivor and Tommy the son. Memory fragments remained elusive, but he began building new memories with William. He decided he wanted to study environmental science, perhaps geology, a future rooted in the mountains that had shaped his past in such profound ways. William supported him wholeheartedly. One crisp autumn afternoon, William found Tommy in the study, looking at the enshrined coat. "It's strange," Tommy said quietly, tracing the glass. "I don't remember wearing it as Tommy Stone. I only remember it as Ben's coat. The warmest thing I owned." William came to stand beside him. "It represents both," he said softly. It's the coat of the boy who was lost and the coat of the young man who showed incredible kindness to a stranger. It's the coat that brought you home. Tommy turned to look at his father, a quiet confidence in his eyes that hadn't been there 2 years ago. Jed used to say the mountain takes, but sometimes it gives back, he recalled. I guess he was right. William put his arm around his son's shoulders, a gesture that now felt natural, comfortable. The path hadn't been easy. The scars of the past remained, for both of them. But looking at his son, alive, healthy, finding his way in the world, William felt a profound, quiet joy. The emptiness was filled. Father and son, reunited by a worn coat and an act of kindness in a snowstorm, were forging a future together, one day, one shared memory at a time. The miracle wasn't just the reunion. It was the slow, steady rebuilding of a life together.